So, I can only imagine. How many of you have heard that song? How many of you have seen the movie I Can Only Imagine? Okay, some of you raise your hands. To give you some context, let me give you a sense of what the story is about. So MercyMe is a Christian rock band, and Bart, the main character in the story, is the lead singer to MercyMe. But it's about more than just what he talks, or more than his song that everybody knows by name. It's about the relationship between a father and a son. And when I saw that movie for the first time, I don't know if my wife noticed this, but I had this tear coming down the side of my eye because it took me back to my relationship with my father, which was not the best of relationships. But as the story goes on, and I can only imagine, we see a father and a son who make certain decisions. We see a father and a son that start to grow. We see a father and a son that make stupid decisions. But as the story continues, we see that growth turn into influence. And then we see the result of that entire story come out in the context of this song, I Can Only Imagine. Now, the father in the story, Bart's father, is a guy by the name of Arthur. And Arthur's nickname was Bub. So I will refer to him as Bub, B-U-B, in this whole thing. And Bub was an all-American football player. Bub had a purpose. Bub knew exactly what he was supposed to be doing, and it was playing football. If you didn't see Jacob Brown yesterday tell his story about when he got cut from the NFL, you need to take a look at it when it gets online, because there's some similarities, there's some parallels here to what Jacob went through and then what Bub went through. After being named All-American and knowing where he was going to go, he was in an accident. And he spent 8 days in a coma. And after coming out of that coma and realizing he would never play football again, I could just imagine the despair that he felt. And Jacob, when he was talking yesterday, talked about the despair that he felt, almost wanting to commit suicide in 2009. And I could imagine that Bub felt the exact same way. And the person that came out of that situation became dark. And as the story goes on, if you haven't seen the movie, you need to see this. That darkness comes out, and he's a horrible father. He's a horrible, horrible husband. I mean, to the point his wife leaves him, and he beats his son so badly, he actually had 2 sons, that the son couldn't go to school some days. Now think about that. He made some really bad decisions. But the story doesn't end there. The story changes, and they start to have this relationship once again. There's a lot more to it before that, but they start to have this relationship to the point where Bart starts to care for his father. His father ends up having cancer and dies. Now, what a sad story. You go from not having a father who beats you to a father you have a relationship with, only to lose that father. And he said, this is from Bart, and he said at the funeral, he said, you know, I just now got the dad that I wanted, and I lost him. Now imagine the feeling that he felt. And his grandmother, I don't know if it was Bub's father or whose father or mother, whose it was, but came up to Bart and he says, look, I can only imagine what Bub is seeing now. And the context of that was, I can only imagine what Bub sees in you, Bart, and the person that you become, the purpose that you now have. Don't lose that purpose. Now, unfortunately, for the next 8 years, Bart had some challenges. He didn't have a clear purpose. It was 8 years later that the song I Can Only Imagine came out. Now, what does this horrible story that actually turns out pretty good, but unfortunately has a death in it, what does it have to do with purpose? What does it have to do with you and I sitting here as leaders and trying to bring this idea of purpose to our organizations? This mix between who I am as a leader and who I am in the business world. What's the point? I think there's at least 4 things we can learn as we go through this story, but I'm going to have you consider one thing. I think sometimes we overcomplicate the idea of purpose. So when I was about 8 years old, my mom and dad are first-generation immigrants from Poland. And they moved to Detroit. And it's the typical story. My dad came over on a boat, literally on a boat, $60 in his pocket, had nothing at all. Lived in Detroit for when they first moved over here, and ultimately got the opportunity to move to the suburbs. So I was raised in Dearborn Heights. Anybody else from that area? Yeah. But when they moved to the suburb, they bought a 912 or so square foot home, and they actually had a lawn, front yard and backyard. Now, if you know anything about us Eastern Europeans or Europeans in general, when you get your first house, it's like, this is pride, right? The American dream has happened. So he took a lot of time to cut his grass. And you know, he's the kind of, you know these people, right? The lines go one way, and the lines go the other way. You know these people? I'm one of those people, right? But he took pride in his lawn. And he did that not so my brother and I could play on it. He did so because he took care of his stuff. In fact, he didn't let us play on it because we might trample the grass. You know those people too, right? Well, about 8 years old, he started to teach me how to do this. And it took me 2 years to learn to do it to his satisfaction. So by 10 years old, I'm going down one way and then going down the path the other way, and those lines had to be just perfect. And he had this thing on the edger. It was one of these hand edgers. You ever see one of those things when you edge between, for you youngins that know nothing about this, we used to edge by hand. Had these spikes on the end of it. You kind of ran along the cement. Well, he had added this little thing to it, so there was a perfect 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch space between the cement and the grass to make it look just perfect. Okay, this is how he is. But at 10 years old, he had the confidence in me to say, go do it yourself. So he and my mom would go to work, and it was during the summer, so I would cut the grass that entire time. And as I'm finishing the grass one Saturday or Friday or whatever it was, across the street and 2 houses over, there was a single mom. She had 2 young kids, and she was a nurse. And if you were to look at their lawn, all of the other houses, it was pristine. They were all Europeans. We all kind of lived with each other. Perfect grass. But that one house, lawn's probably, maybe not that tall, but it was horrible, right? Nothing had been edged. And the problem was, every time I saw the kids out, and they must have been 3 or 5, 3 and 5, they had to play on the cement. Now, a 3 and a 5-year-old playing on the cement because the yard was overgrown completely. And that one Friday or Saturday, whatever it was, after I was done cutting the grass, I thought, you know what? I'm going to go over there and I'm going to cut the grass. So I went over there, and it must have taken 3 gallons of gas in this little tiny lawnmower that, we had to push lawnmowers at that time, right? And I'm trying to cut through this stuff, and, I had to go over it 3 or 4 times, but the lines were there. I edged it. It was perfect. It looked great. Went back home. They must not have been home. The next morning, we were getting ready to go to church, and I can see the lady outside with her 2 kids. And she was crying. And she came over and she said, I heard you cut my grass. I said, yeah. She said, I can't believe that you were to do that for me. At that point, I realized that the decision that I make, I had one purpose. It was to give those kids some place to play that they couldn't get, their mother wasn't able to give to them. I made a choice. To fulfill that purpose of giving them a place to be. It's not dissimilar. CVS in 2014. They used to be one of the biggest retailers of tobacco products? What did they do in 2014? They stopped selling tobacco cold turkey. Stopping cold turkey. Okay, you didn't get that joke. I get it. Right? 2014, they made a decision to stop selling tobacco cold turkey, $2 billion in revenue like that. They made a decision. Now, the lucky thing is that they ended up gaining that back plus 10% in a matter of 2 years. But they made a decision. Here's what I want you to start with. One of the lessons that we can learn. Bart and Bub at some point through the story made a decision after he learned he couldn't play football, after he abused his kids, after he was a horrible, horrible person. He made a decision that it was time to change. Purpose is not a feeling or not just a feeling. Purpose is an action. Purpose, number one, is a choice. It's a decision. So we know how important the power of why is, this whole idea of purpose, and you hear the Simon Sinek, there's been references that why is what drives us. We're here because we have a purpose. We want to learn more about this why. But I want to put something in front of you and let you I want you to marinate on this. Where's Joy? Joy used this term earlier of you got to marinate on this idea, and I said I'm going to steal the idea. I want you to marinate on this for a second. Can the power of why be negative? Can your purpose actually be negative? Yes or no? The power of why is so powerful that sometimes you do whatever you can. The why is something that you shouldn't go after, but that's how powerful the purpose or this idea of why is. All right, how many of you have one of these, an iPhone? Okay, put your hands down. How many of you have an Android? Boy, are you the smarter ones or not so smart? Okay, let's play this out here for a second. For those of us that spend $1,300 for an iPhone, if you bought the newest one when it came out, yet you can get an Android for free, why do we buy an iPhone? Why did I spend $1,300? I'm not casting judgment here. Why did you spend $1,300 on an iPhone when you can get an Android that does the exact same thing? How does Apple, what do they know about the power of why, the way our minds are wired? How do they market to us? Is it you can send a text? Is it you can take a phone call? Who does that anymore? How do they market to us? Your life is going to change. You will be successful. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, right? But look at their commercials. And now they got this purple candy iPhone. It's like I look at the commercial thinking, well, it makes me feel good, but there's no point in a purple iPhone. Now, if you have a purple iPhone, I'm not passing judgment. Please understand that, right? But let's think about this. They know how powerful, because as Simon Sinek writes in his book, The Power of Why, right? It's all about the way our mind works, right? Part of our mind is kind of the practical side. The other side is the emotional side. And it's the emotional side that causes us to go into action. The power of why is real. The power of purpose is real. And I'll give you an example of this in a second. But here's what I want you to look at. There's a definition on the screen of the power of purpose, right? The reason why we do something. But that often seems very linear. I lived most of my life on one purpose. Could you have multiple purposes at the same time? Think about that for a second. Should you have or could you have multiple purposes at the same time? The answer is yes. It's not, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up. That's kind of the fallacy that we go off of. Purpose changes as we make decisions and as we grow. And we need to understand this. So, I've been an entrepreneur for a long time. That's why I'm bald. And I deal with people. That's why I cannot get it to grow back on my head. Right? This is a problem for me. I've been bald for a long time. But in the early 90s, I got into an industry. I'm in the people business. I'm in the talent space. And I got into the business because I felt I was dealing with an industry that was all messed up. Right? It's the recruiting space, the development space, and so on. And I was on the receiving end of that for a while. And it's like, this sucks. You people don't know what you're doing when it comes to people. And I got this idea in my head to join an organization that I had ended up using to open a new office for them. And I wanted to kind of be an entrepreneur. And that was my first real foray into entrepreneurship. And I was excited, man. This was my first chance to change an industry. My purpose was to change the entire industry that is in the billions and billions and billions of dollars in terms of revenue today. But it wasn't about the money for me at the time. It was about the purpose of people. We lived in when we were starting that particular business, we lived in a double-wide trailer in Novi, Michigan. And I'd sit there in our bedroom, because that was the only place. You don't have a basement in a double-wide trailer. Figure that, right? And I was thinking, how do I change what's going on? How do I change this industry? And I was up day and night, and 100% of my focus was on this mission of changing the industry. And the lady that lived next door to us had worked for the school system for like 17 years. And my excitement about what I was trying to do actually got her to a point where a few years later, she left her pension, everything, to come work for me. She bought into this purpose that I had laid out that I was excited for, the influence as a leader, right? She bought into it, so I ended up attracting the people that I needed. I went from this idea of purpose to attracting people, and we've heard other speakers talk about the power of that. And then we started to think about, how do we make our purpose come to life? We've got purpose, we got people, we have to have a process that actually gets us to our purpose. And we started to create those efficiencies and so on. And we measured performance against purpose. Are we making an impact in the industry? And guess what? If we had purpose, if we had people, if we had the right process that drove our purpose, and our performance was measured against purpose, what would come? What's that final P that's missing? Profits would come as a byproduct. And that's what started to happen. And I wish the story ended there. But it only gets worse from there. What happens to many, and I'm one of these, when profits started to come through the doors? Where did my purpose go? Was it about changing the industry? Or was it about making more money? It became profits. The power of why is so powerful. And as we grow, we have more discernment. The power of why was so powerful in the story of Bub and of Bart, right? Bub wanted to play football. When he lost it, he went deep and dark. I did the exact same thing. I started to focus on profit. So performance was all about measure it against profit. Our process was to maximize profit. Our people were all measured against profit. And my purpose became solely profit. You've seen people do this. You may have done this yourself. Your organization may be doing this, right? The influence we have as leaders is incredible. And at this point, because I was so focused on profits, anything that got in my way, anybody that got in my way, I pushed away. If you didn't hit your number, you were fired. If you spoke up against something I said, you were fired. If you were my wife, who happens to be here, sitting over there, and said, hey, do you really need to be gone again? I pushed her away. My kids, at the time they were very young, pushed them away. They were a hassle to me. Now, in the back of my mind, I knew better, but the power of why, the power of purpose was so incredible that at one point my purpose became me. And after 20 years of marriage, I asked my wife for a divorce. Now, we've been married for 29 years now, so things worked out. The end of the story is it worked out. But it was such a painful point in my life. And I didn't learn from experience. You would think somebody who pushed away, they're a team. I had turnover that was 45, 40, 50%. I had longtime executives that I fired because they looked at me the wrong way. You would think after looking at all that experience would teach me. You would think after Bub beat the hell out of his son, that experience would teach him. Eventually, it did. So about 9 years ago, I got a call from my coach. I have a business coach that at the time I had for years and years and years. And he said, Steve, you got to go see my coach. He knew some of the things that I was going through. He knew kind of my view. I had gone from purpose to really purpose of profits, and that was the only thing. He saw the turnover in the organization. He saw the challenges that I was experiencing. He said, you got to go see my coach. I said, I pay you. Why do I want to go see somebody else? He said, fine, I'll do it. His name is Burke. So I called Burke up and I said, John told me I got to come see you. I really don't want to. I think I'm doing fine. I'm making all the money in the world I need to make. I really don't need you, but John said it, so I trust John, so I'm going to come see you. Well, this was like June of that year. And it was 3 days before I was supposed to go, and I called him up and I said, yeah, I'm not going to go, Burke. I'm too busy. Fine, will you reschedule? Sure, I'll reschedule. So I rescheduled it. A month later, I'm supposed to go. Called him 3 days before. Yeah, Burke, I'm not going to go. I'm too busy. Too busy making money. That's my purpose. Everything else is falling apart, right? Everything's falling apart, but that's my purpose. So he calls me up on a Friday. He says, Steve, I've been thinking about you. I know you canceled twice. I'm going to give you one more shot. I have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday open. I want you to fly to Arizona and meet me in Arizona. And I look at my calendar, I'm like, okay, this never happens. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday has nothing on my calendar. Not one thing. I can't tell you that there's another 3 days in my schedule and probably yours that literally has nothing on it that close to where I am right now. So I said, fine, I'll go. I told my wife, and I think she was just like, get out of the house. You just need to be gone. I'm kidding. My wife's not like that by any stretch of the imagination. So the idea was go spend 3 days in the desert. And the first thing to do was reflect on experience. So I said earlier, I didn't learn from experience. I had made the same mistake over and over and over. We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on that experience and learning something from that experience. And that was day one. What was going on? Why was I making those decisions? What was happening? And so on. Getting me to the point, I was really worked up that first night, right? All these things came out. And I could imagine if Burke was with Bart from I Could Only Imagine. And what Bart was saying about his father and his life and no purpose now and all of that, I was kind of doing the same thing, both with my dad and everything else that had gone on in life at that time. And I was really worked up. And the goal the next day was go out into the desert by yourself, no phone. How many of you can go 3 days without your phone? Yeah, not going to happen, right? No phone, nothing except a pad of paper, a pencil, bottle of water, and you know those beach chairs that sit really low? Like, so you're sitting on the beach and you're like this? That's kind of what I had. And he takes me out and on this trail in the desert, and after this 1 day of reflection of what's going on, he says, hey, spend time with your thoughts and just write. And I'm like, I came out here for 3 days, paid you $5,000 for this, when I could be back making money. This is where my thought, how demented is that? But it was the power of why. So I said, fine. So he gets me out there way before the sun comes up. He says, this is where you're going to be. Stay kind of within this area because there's wild animals around here. Okay, things went from bad to worse. And we're walking down this path because he had to show me where we're going. There's like bobcat dung steaming. That just means they just were there. And this is where I'm supposed to be for 24 hours. Okay, now I'm ticked. I mean, I'm angry at this point. And Burke walks me out there. It's probably a 7-mile walk on this trail. So stay in this area and just write whatever you want to do, contemplate, think about what we did yesterday. I'll come pick you up in 24 hours. Okay, fine. So I'm pacing. I got my backpack with this water, and I'm pacing, and I'm fuming, and I'm probably saying words that I'm not going to repeat here, and I'm just ticked. And there's this berm on one side. And I thought, you know what? I need to relax. I need to chill. So I set my chair up on this berm. It's not real high. Maybe it's 3 feet tall or something like that. And there's a mountain in front of me. And I didn't know this at the time, but there was a mountain behind me. This is before sunrise. And as I'm sitting there, wallowing in my pain, self-imposed at this particular point, so the sun's coming up behind me and the mountain's in front of me. What starts to happen to the mountain in front of me? The sun starts to go down the mountain, right? Because as the sun's coming up behind me, the sun's coming closer and closer and closer and closer. And I'm sitting in my chair and watching the sun, watching the line go down the actual mountain. And it's moving and moving and moving as the sun continues to move, and it should have been doing that all day. But as I sat there, contemplating now all the people that I had pushed away, the relationships that I had burned and continued to burn, I started to look to the left and to the right, the other left and right, and the sun's no longer moving. So I'm in the shade. There's sun on the right, there's sun on the left. And as it continues to move behind me, I'm at a point, and the point's not moving. And I'm kind of looking around, freaking out at this point, going, wait a minute, the sun's moving, but I'm sitting here at the point. I happened to be in the spot where the mountain behind me had formed a perfect point. But as I'm looking at this and contemplating all the questions that he had the day before, thinking about the experiences, I thought, oh my gosh, this is where you want me to be. I'm listening. Tell me what you want me to do. Tell me what's going on in my particular. I mean, I was shaken. I was so scared of what was going on. And this is not a vision or anything along those lines, but a few minutes later, down this path, are these three older people walking towards me. These are real people. One's got a cane and kind of walking with a limp, and they were having the time of their lives. I think it was a couple plus one is really what it was, an older friend. And it was just at the point where I'm thinking, evaluating the experience of how badly I treated everybody around me. And here was the picture of relationships in front of me at 80 years old. Man, did that hurt. But at the same time, it created a perspective in me. I started to grow. I started to realize that the purpose I originally had that turned into completely throwing away all my relationships, I had an opportunity to make a choice. Bub had an opportunity later in life to make a choice. He learned from his experience. And luckily, I was given the chance to make that choice. And when I came back, I still had a long way to go and a long way to grow, and I still continue to do that. But I started to value people like I never valued them before. Here's the whole concept that I want to make sure that we understand. Oops, hitting the wrong one. I get worked up. Sometimes I don't even use the slides themselves. Purpose is based on continuous growth in us. Because as we grow, if we don't take time to reflect and grow on what we've been through, what we've done, we will never meet our actual purpose. Our purpose changes based on the way we grow. You can't help somebody else with their purpose and their growth if you don't look internal and learn something new every single day. Purpose as a leader starts with your own growth, and it begins with the choice you make, just like the choice that Bub made, which was not an easy choice. So as the story goes with Bart and with Bub, Bart eventually leaves the house, right? Bub is beating the heck out of him. Bart wanted to play football originally. Bart got hurt as well, but decides, you know what, I got this singing thing down, so I'm going to leave the house and I'm going to avoid my dad completely. And he goes off for a period of time, and eventually the draw comes that he wants to confront his father, right? He doesn't know at this point that Bub had made the decision to become a better version of himself. He had made the decision that he needed another purpose because he lost it when he lost football. He finally came to the realization that something else was going on. But when Bart got home, he didn't know that. He was ready to slap his dad, right? He wanted to come back, and this is the guy that kicked my butt. Guess what? I'm going to tell him I'm a bigger dude now. And in the movie, they're up for breakfast. Bub gets up. He knew Bart came home. Bub gets up early, makes them this cool breakfast, something that Bub never did. And Bart's kind of looking around when he gets up, and he's like, really? You think breakfast is going to, solve all the problems that we've had all these years? And then he's looking around and saying, you're actually doing work on the house? It's kind of like Bub had a purpose again, right? A good, not a negative one, but he actually had a positive purpose again. And Bart didn't believe him. When I got back from this trip in the desert, now one thing I forgot to tell you, one of the things that I did while I was in the desert is when I realized what I was being taught and that my purpose as a father was to be there for my kids. And my purpose as a husband was to love my wife. And the purpose as a CEO was not to make money. My purpose as a CEO was to help my team grow. I don't think they believed me when I came back. I had the right intent. I had the right focus. But it took some time, just like it took time for Bart to see what Bub was doing, that he had actually become a different person. It wasn't perfect, none of us are, but that he had a new purpose in life. In Bub's case, his purpose was his faith, and that's what drew him to grow. But here's my point in this whole piece here. As leaders, we are the ones that are influencing our team. If our purpose as a leader is to continually grow, there's a higher probability our teams will continue to grow. If our purpose is truly to change an industry or whatever it is for your organization, and we live that, you'll start to change an industry. But if you don't live that, so even prior to going on this trip, I talked about it. Man, I could go head to head with purpose with you and talk about it, and you'd believe me. And I was living a purpose that was completely the opposite. The power of purpose is real. But as leaders, we need to make sure that we're influencing our teams in the right way, and they are watching everything that we do. Everything that we do. Now, the second thing that I wanted to hit on in this particular point, again, it took Bub some time to get Bart to believe. It took me to get my team to believe. And I think there's probably even still some doubt 8.5 years later because people have stayed along. I wouldn't have worked for me. I'm surprised they continued to work for me after all these years. And I've got a few here somewhere that have been with me forever that I'm like, dude, you're nuts. Why would you have... Anyways. But our goal as leaders, how do we take our growth and how do we help our teams grow? Because our purpose as a leader is first our own continuous growth, and then it's the continuous growth of our teams. But I think we get it wrong. I got this wrong. I'll give you an example of it. You know, we want to hear from our teams about, okay, what's important to you? And somebody in the audience or somebody in the group will say, hey, Steve, the thing that's really important to me is family. Now, if one of your teams says that to you, what comes to mind? Somebody says, the thing that's important to me is family. What's the assumption you make? Children. What else? Spouse. What else? Parents. I want to take time off. I don't want to work 5 days. Whatever. What are the other assumptions that come to mind about it? What's that? Bring kids to work. You know, I've seen that last presentation a couple of times. Incredibly awesome. Hey, bring your kid to work. We now do that. But anyways, let's think about this. Everybody there was a number of different assumptions. We're talking about our role as leaders, right? Our purpose as leaders is to help our teams grow. But when we hear something like, well, family's really important to me, we make an assumption about what it is about family that's important to them. So what do? Well, we give flex time, we give all these things. Are we actually helping that person grow based on what's important to them? Let's think about this for a second. Are we really helping our role as a leader? My belief is our role as a leader to help people live out their purpose. In order to help them live out their purpose, what do we need to know? What do we need to know to help somebody else live out their purpose? What's their purpose? And I don't mean singular purpose. What if that situation was, family's really important to me? Define that for me. How do you know you've achieved that? Well, it's not about being home more. What it is my wife and I, or my husband and I, whatever the case might be, we want our kids to be able to go to private school. So I actually am willing to sacrifice and work more right now to make more money. We didn't assume that, did we? In most cases. If our purpose as leaders is to help somebody else grow, we need them to define what growth looks like. What's the goal in their own terms? As an employee, as a husband, as a wife, as a whatever else? What are the areas of life that are the most important to them? And what does the goal look like in each of those areas? Then and only then, as a leader, are we fulfilling our purpose of helping them achieve their purpose. Davin opened up yesterday and he said something that I've used this for years now. He said leadership was fill in the blank. Do you remember what he said? Leadership is influence. We are influencing whether we realize it or not. Based on our own purpose, we're either influencing positively or negatively, potentially. For years, I influenced negatively, right? How do you get influence with somebody? How do you create influence with somebody on your team in your organization? What is it? Demonstrate it. Keep going. Trust. What else? Leadership is influence. Influence is based on a relationship. The only way to get somebody to tell you what their goal is, what their purpose is in each area of life, because I believe we all have multiple purposes, is to have a relationship with them. Do you think one of your team members are going to tell you what their personal goals are if you don't have a relationship with them? Mine didn't. I knew nothing about employees that had been with me for years. I've learned more about my team in the last 2 years than I did in the previous 20. Once my purpose started to change. So we have to identify what their goal is, what's their purpose in each area of life. Let them define it, but they'll only do that if you have a relationship with them in the first place. Then you've got to make sure you understand the reality of where they are. It's one thing to understand where they want to go, what their purpose is. The other thing is to understand where are they right now. Nobody will share that with you unless you have a relationship with them, because that's vulnerable, right? I shared with you where I was in hopes that you would learn from evaluate my experience so you never have to go through it. And I'm hoping that nobody's gone through what I went through, but everyone's watching you. Everybody's getting drawn by their whys. There's no question about it. We've got to be very, very careful, right? But we've got to understand the reality. Then we can have a conversation. What's the obstacles in their way of achieving that? And how do we help them achieve what they want to achieve? Now, anytime I talk about this concept, right, of helping somebody on my team achieve what they want to achieve, and I'm sure you've thought about this as well, that means they could leave your organization. Because if they get to a point where you can't help them any longer, they're going to go somewhere else. Great. Now you're all looking at me going, we're supposed to be attracting people by our purpose, and you're telling me to let people go because of our purpose? Your role as a leader, just like your role as a parent, is, if you're a parent, if you're not, you'll understand it at some point, is to have the best for your team. I believe our purpose as leaders is to set our teams up for their success. During the time they're with our organization, they will help us. There's a practical end to this, which I'll get to in a second. They will help us achieve what we need to stay in operation. But as leaders, it shouldn't be about us and only our purpose. It should be about our team's purpose. And yes, at some point, they can and they will leave. And I've had those people leave. but they left for the right reason. When they came to me and said, Steve, I'm leaving because of this, and we were able to tie it back to what they really wanted in terms of their purpose, their individual goals, and we as an organization had a part in helping them achieve that, yeah, it hurt us. But do you think eventually our purpose of people living their purpose gets out there? And it's easier to bring people in as a result of that. So let's go back. Purpose is about a decision. Purpose is about our own continuous growth. Purpose as a leader is about the continuous growth of our teams. And I just want to give you this last piece on this. So it took 8 years for Bart to write the song, I Can Only Imagine, after his grandmother said to him, at the funeral of all places, I can only imagine what Bub sees now. 8 years he kind of toiled. Here's the cool part of the story. When Bub made a decision to change who he was and went through this growth process, and that growth process, if you watch the movie, actually influenced Bart on his journey of growth. And that influenced Bart got him to the point 8 years later to write the song that has influenced people all across the globe. But Bart took dollars and a life insurance policy, or Bub did, and set up Bart to be taken care of for a period of time because he knew that Bart's purpose in life was to sing. Period. And he'd made the sacrifice before he died to set Bart up. The day the song hit number 1 8 years later was the day Bart received the last check from his father, who died 8 years previously because of what he had set up and what he had sacrificed. Here's my point in this. As I started off with the story of purpose, people, process, performance against purpose, there's a practical end. When we think about it from a business perspective, we want practicality. I work that way. It's not that I want something out of it, but if we take this idea of purpose all the way through, there's a practical end from a business perspective. Because this is, when I talk to organizations about purpose, usually I get the CEO who's like, what's it mean to us? Now, first I got to work on the idea of purpose with that particular person, right? But it's like, there is a practical end to this. Let's think about sacrifice. If your people see the purpose of your organization, if they see the purpose from you as a leader is your own personal growth and their personal growth, are they willing to sacrifice for you? I'll give you an example. About 2.5 years ago, I finally realized, I'm a slow learner, guys. Look, I'm 50. You hear the stupid mistakes that I made, right? It's like it's staring me in the face, but I still learn slow. So 2.5 years ago, I realized my purpose needs to be to continue helping my team live their purpose. So in order to do that, I'm going to dedicate the time as the CEO of the business to help them through this journey. And I started a leadership class internally. That leadership class went from 1 to 2 to 3, and I now run 5. It takes up about 55% of my time. But when I went back to them and said, I got to do it at 7 a.m., it's not mandatory. You show up. We had about 3/4 of the company say, I'm in. I'll sacrifice what's going on because you're willing to sacrifice for me. There's a practical application to purpose. We can keep going. You remember Bernie Madoff? Did Bernie Madoff have a purpose? What was it? Make as much money as I can and take it from you. It was a purpose. And he lived that purpose for the majority of his life, right? But on the flip side of that, purpose can be a positive direction as well. That's an example as a negative. We heard from other speakers, right? Purpose. When Austin was talking about his purpose after 2 plane crashes. Lost his mother the first time, his stepmother and his father the second time, and his siblings the first time. What gave him direction? His why, his purpose that his father instilled in him. Purpose, the right purpose, gives us the right direction. From a practical perspective, and we heard this just before I came up here, purpose allows you to attract people. I'll end with the story really quickly. I used to do this Harley trip with 9 guys every year. We'd go down south or wherever. In this one particular year, we went out west. We shipped our bikes to Denver, Colorado, and then did Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota. And we like to take the back roads. We don't go all the way out there to be on the expressway. You take the back roads so you can see the scenery. And it's like our second day into the trip. And all of us, I'm way in the back of the pack of the 8 or 9 of us, and all of a sudden, everyone slows down. Like, what's going on? So we get off our bikes, and there's actually a herd of cows coming from one side of the mountain, through the valley, and up the other side. And we thought, hey, this is really cool. So what'd we do? We all got off our bikes, and we're taking pictures like little girls, right? Hey, I got all these selfies of me and these cows in the background. Get back on our bikes, we take off. A couple days later, we're on a different part of the trip, and everybody slows down again. Now you got cows coming from one side. This must have been that time of year, and I know nothing about cows, right? And up the other side. And we all slow down, and about half of us got off the bikes. The other half are like, been there, done that. So 10 days later, we're riding back. It happens one more time. There was less cows. None of us got off our bikes. But had we been looking up and watching these cows, and one of the cows happened to be purple, would we pay attention? Purpose, when done correctly, is your purple cow. Think about it from a recruiting perspective and bringing people to your team. Do your people want to know what they're doing? Some. Are they more concerned about what you stand for, about what you're trying to do? Purpose is practical. Oops. And just the last one. People working in the same direction for the same cause, with a leadership team that's supporting them to hit their goals. Do you think it's a stronger team or a weaker team? Do you think their performance is better or worse? Hands down, it's better. Let me close with this. As leaders, as people that care about purpose, I can only imagine the impact you have when you make the choice, when you focus on your own growth every day, when you focus on the growth of your teams every day, the impact that you will make. I can only imagine the impact that you're going to make. Thank you, everybody.